Hello, and welcome to the Pollinator Habitat How-To webinar series. And today we'll be covering the basics of native plant gardening. Moving to our next presenter, we have Holly Anderson. She's going to be kind of giving an overview on recognizing nativars or cultivars of native plants. And with that, I will just pass it over to Holly.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate everybody being with us today. My name is Holly Anderson. I'm the urban conservationist with the Pulaski Conservation District. I've also been on the outreach and education subcommittee of the Monarch Partnership for many years. I enjoy doing these kinds of presentations and meeting with folks that are interested in native plants. Today, I'm going to do an overview and a quick introduction to nativars. I'm really gearing this towards people that maybe don't have nativars on their radar yet, maybe haven't read a lot about it. So I apologize to those that already know about all this, and that this might be more of an introduction and something you already know about. But I'm hoping there's plenty of folks out there that maybe have not had nativars on their radar and want to know just a little bit about what are nativars, maybe how do we recognize nativars in real life and also in catalogs and nurseries, nursery catalogs, and also a little bit about the current research on the value of nativars as pollinator food sources. So let's just get right into it. What is the difference between a straight native and a nativar? So the term nativar, a lot of scientists don't really like that term, but it's out there and it's becoming more and more used among the lay community. So you're going to see it, you're going to hear it, and I'm going to be using it today. Straight natives are native plants that are unmodified and unmanipulated and being provided to you for sale in exactly the way that they would be out in the wild. Nativars, on the other hand, are selected, hybridized, or crossbred varieties of native plants that have been managed with human intervention. And you can kind of see a little bit of difference right here with these two photos. So the types of nativars that we see, one is called selected. So those are variations that are found in nature that have occurred through a genetic mutation that has actually occurred out in nature. They are, those variations are typically subtle and not as noticeable as a cultivated. So, sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with excuse me. Okay, here we go. So cultivated plants are variations that are actually occurring through direct human intervention. And the variations in the way those plants look versus the straight native is typically not as subtle as it will be in one of the selected plants. So selected plants, someone would come across them out in the wild. Maybe they have a much more saturated color. The person sees that, brings that plant into human cultivation, and continues that color saturation in the reproductive process and continues that on into plants that might be available to you. Whereas the cultivated plant is going to be a much greater human intervention involved in it. So I'm just going to show a few pictures just to kind of give you an idea. So this would, and I'm going to use purple coneflowers. It's something that we're all familiar with, but they're also excellent at showing these variations, and they have been highly manipulated as nativars, and so you're going to see them a lot in catalogs, and they're just an excellent example of being able to see these differences in the photos. So this is the straight native purple coneflower, just as it would be seen out in nature, and if you bought a straight native and brought it into your yard. This is a photo of a selected purple coneflower. So you can see the petals don't droop as much, the color's more saturated, the actual flower could be a little bit larger than what you're going to see with a straight native. These are some photos of the hybridized. So these are actually photos taken directly from an online plant catalog. So these are actually coneflowers that are available for purchase through plant catalogs, and they have been highly cultivated. You can see that they have different colors. They're not even recognizable as a purple coneflower. And if they're not recognizable to us, they're probably not going to be recognizable to insects that might be looking for a food source. You can see that there's a double variety in addition to the ones that aren't even purple anymore. So these are the highly cultivated varieties. So other than this appearance situation, how do you know that you're getting a nativar when you're looking to purchase native plants? Nativars are typically have a descriptive cultivar name in addition to the scientific or common name. So on the left, we have the straight Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower, and on the right, we have the selected purple coneflower, which is given the cultivar name Magnus. And so it's going to be identified in the plant catalog as Echinacea purpurea Magnus. So there you have just an excellent example of a straight native versus the selected nativar. When you look at straight natives, as one of the other speakers talked about, when you're dealing with native plants, it's a really good idea to begin to use the Latin terminology. Some of the common names, I mean, my grandmother called certain things, and somebody else's grandmother called them something different. But when we're using the scientific names, we're all talking about exactly the same thing. And so you'll find, I know when I first started doing this, it seemed strained and it seemed difficult. And over time, it just got easier and easier and easier as you begin to use those names and see those names and kind of get over the initial fear factor of using these Latin names. But they're going to be excellent resources for you when you're looking at catalogs or you're looking at labels at a nursery to know what you're dealing with. And with the straight natives, I've got two examples here. Again, in the coneflowers, the Echinacea purpurea, which is the purple coneflower, and then the Echinacea pallida, which is the pale purple coneflower. So you see that you have the genus and species name followed by the species name. Echinacea is the genus, purpurea versus pallida are the species names. And then on the nativar, you have that nativar identification back behind it of Magnus, in addition to the actual Latin name with genus and species. So what I'm finding when I'm looking through catalogs is these nativars are being identified in the catalogs, and they are being identified in most reputable landscape nurseries on their labels when they're using them. If you have any questions when you're at those nurseries, and I'm talking about plant nurseries, not like Home Depot or Lowe's. I mean, you guys know by now you can't really ask very many questions when you're there at those kind of places, but you can ask questions in those If the guy that's standing out there with the watering hose can't answer that question, he can find somebody there at that nursery that can answer that question for you about nativars and labeling of nativars when you go in there and you're wanting to get very good information. So with a straight native, on these naming conventions on labels, and particularly in your plant catalogs, the genus and species is going to be in italics. The genus is uppercase, the species is lowercase, and there, as we've said before, there's no other identification except possibly the common name following it. So here are a couple of examples of that. I know these slides have a lot on them, but I wanted you to see these various ways that these plants can be identified. So again, genus and species in italics, followed by a cultivar identifier that is not italicized and is typically in single marks there. The echinacea, so the Symphotrichum oblongifolium, October skies, that's a very common cultivar of the aster, the purple aster for wintertime, and then the Echinacea purpurea magnus that we've talked about before. You can see exactly what you're dealing with. When you see that, you know you're dealing with a nativar. You may see a variety identified with the letters VAR. So in this case, the Cercis canadensis variety alba, alba being the Latin for white. So you know you're getting a white cultivar there when you see that VAR and then a word following that. You can get as complicated as you want to get with this. I mean, you know, horticulturalists love messing with plants. So you can get a variety and a cultivar combined. So you've got your variety inermis and then the cultivar sunburst in the single quotes after that. And then when you go even further into the hybridizing, then that is identified with an X in there. So the Lavingula X intermedia, Lavingula X intermedia, and then the phenomenal as the identifier there at the end of that. So you can get as involved in this as you want to get involved in it as you do more research and you look at these plant labels. If you don't want to get that involved, all you got to know is just to recognize, you know, am I getting a nativar or am I not? And you don't have to get all hung up in varieties and cultivars and hybrids and all that kind of stuff unless you're really into that. You're just identifying that, okay, when I see these things, when I see these names in single quotes, when I see VAR, when I see an X, I'm getting something that is manipulated. And that's as far as you have to get into it if you don't want to go any further. So why have nativars become a topic of conversation for us? Well, if you're on here, you're a person that wants to include plants that are beneficial to pollinators in our home gardens, creating more of a habitat situation as opposed to just something that's visually attractive. Native plant specialty nurseries are few and far between. They are sometimes harder to locate and access. Many retail landscape nurseries are now carrying nativars. In a lot of cases, they're carrying more nativars than they are straight natives. And the big reason we're talking about it today is that the scientific research on the educational value of nativars so far is what we're going to be calling, I'm going to be calling inconclusive at this point. So those are the reasons why we're talking about this and including this in our workshop today. So the best advice right now is that we use straight natives for the absolute best known value for pollinators. There is research ongoing. There are different types of research that they're doing. Different groups are doing it. The two ways that I've seen the research that's being done is they will actually more than likely put a grad student out there with a clipboard, and they sit all day, and they've got a straight native plant planted right, some straight natives planted right next to these nativars, and that person is visually monitoring the number of visits that those two plants receive from pollinators. So they're ticking off, you know, in the space of an hour, this is how many insects visited the straight native versus this is how many insects visited the nativar. So they're actually monitoring the selection of the plant by the insect making a decision. This is the plant I'm going to land on and eat from. The other way they do the research, is by actually sampling the volume of pollen and nectar in a nativar versus the straight native, and looking at that from the standpoint of the food value based on that volume, the actual volume of food that is available to the insect. So when we look at these research projects, of course, they're looking at specific species, genus and species. And what we're finding is that the research shows that you can't make a definitive statement that all nativars are beneficial or that all nativars are not beneficial. So they're finding that some species of nativars are beneficial to insects. They're finding in some research projects there are some species that will actually be chosen more often by an insect on the nativar than it is on the straight native. And so it's all over the board. And for us as consumers, it would be very difficult for us to read all of that research at this point and know which nativar is beneficial and which nativar is not. So that it's just making it a little hard on us, but that's why we are saying from the Monarch Conservation Partnership standpoint that using the straight natives is the absolute best known value for pollinators, and trying to source from local specialty nurseries if at all possible, and then with your mail order native plant nurseries as a second choice. And when you're at your local non-native specialty landscape nursery, being very aware of the labeling on those plants and asking questions, and letting your nurseryman know that you're educated in this area, and is this a nativar or is this not, and having those kind of conversations with him. So it's very difficult to know which nativars are supportive of pollinators and which are not. And like I said, you'd have to look at all the various research projects to make those kind of individual decisions. So the specific type of nativars to be wary of, double or triple flowers on an otherwise altered form of the actual flower itself that's going to affect the accessibility of the nectar and pollen to the insect. So the double flowers really do affect the ability of that insect to access the pollen or nectar. And as you can see, when we looked at our straight native versus our selected, those differences we said were subtle, as opposed to these differences that are not the least bit subtle. So flower form and affecting the accessibility of nectar or pollen, there's some disagreement, I guess I'll call it, or it's not fully well known yet about the difference in height between like maybe your straight Joe Pye weed and your little Joe that's a dwarf, that's a more manageable size for the home garden. We do believe that insects move in strata throughout the environment, throughout their habitat, so there's a good possibility that differences in height could have an effect. But again, all of that research is really ongoing, and we don't have anything definitive at this point. But we do know that double and triple flowers are something we need to be very aware of. Significant color changes beyond just the saturation of the hue is another thing that we want to be very aware of between the nativar, the straight native, and the nativar. Okay, so that's really just the introduction that I have to just kind of get you started. If this is something new to you, there's plenty more research to be done. You can get into it really heavily. The source that I like is this budburst.org/nativars. It's affiliated with the Chicago Botanical Gardens, and they are doing a lot of research, putting nativars and straight natives out there and monitoring visits and doing the research directly on those. Okay, so that's it. Thanks a lot for everybody being here with us today. I've really enjoyed hearing all the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Holly. Wonderful as always.